Oh, so, no, there's no one here, but I'm pretty sure this gets recorded, hopefully, so that I can post it later. But yeah, I'm just chilling here. I love symbolism, obviously, like, if you know any of my posts. So, yeah, I'm just here to discuss with myself. So one of the things that I often think about when it comes to signs versus symbols and how they impact us on a collective versus a personal level is symbols always have a elusive, not only an elusive, but a powerful quality to them. Like, they touch a certain part of our hearts that we can't quite express, right? And so in a way, they are like the art of dreams, right? Because art kind of straddles the line between the real, right, and the creative, right? And that's sort of the balance of Libra and the artist. And why I say this is because when we just kind of art in wonderland and open up our mind, sometimes we have certain thoughts that are more just kind of thoughts, right, passing through. But then there are these core facets and symbols that we kind of, I wouldn't say revolve around, but sort of cycle through in a way, because it's like very dynamic, right? But yeah, so that's how, like, personally you can tell if something's symbolic to you by the meaning that it elicits in your being, right? Like, if I pass by something and I get triggered, which I don't want to use that word in a negative way, it's just literally does something come up, right? Then that sort of holds a symbolic value, right? Like, say a cop, right? Like, if a cop just passes by, that may have like an alarming reaction to me, right? And there's a whole sort of construct that I'm responding to, like, outside of just the particular situation, right? Because nothing could be happening. It's just now that I'm aware of this presence, like, I sort of get triggered. I'm like, oh shit, I better make sure, like, I'm square, you know? And so this is sort of the way that we can tell if things are symbolic on a personal level, right? Like, what is meaningful to me and what I might put as my centerpiece may be very, very different than what you put as your centerpiece, right? And what I literally have, say, on like a pedestal, because it has more of a higher overarching meaning that I can, like a vision that I can work towards, right? That may not be the same for you. You may look at that same piece and feel nothing, right? Whereas someone else, that could literally light a fire in their soul, right? And this is like the symbolic value of something, right? So what's really interesting about this is collectively, symbols play out as memes that are more signs to the individual. And I just find that so fascinating, because when something is symbolic in the collective, like, mind space, right, this just sort of becomes a meme, right? It becomes something that we all sort of see and interact with, right? And we all have different opinions on these memes, right? On these symbols, right? And so this is how, like, myth plays a symbolic role in the collective sphere, right? Like our current mythos. But an individual is going to interact with that in their own way, right? I really like, one of the things that kind of helped me see this is Carl Jung talks about in dream analysis, which I haven't looked too much into it, like other perspectives, right? So don't call me out like, hey, you could do so much better. Like, I'm working, right? He points out how there are psychic dynamics in which are natural to the human experience, right? And how we can kind of look at the human being in a generic way with all its organs and its proper, like, mental functioning, right? And see what certain things mean based on the collective mythos, right? And the current culture, right? But the thing about it is, everybody is a unique perspective or a subjective experience, right? So we're all going to experience that mythos in a different light, right? So we may think that, say, the divine feminine is super nurturing, right? But to someone who had a very, like, narcissistic mother, that may not be the case, right? And the symbol may may play a completely different role, right? And yeah, and even like more so or less so, right? Some people may be more connected to that feminine mothering energy, and other people may not even look at that with any sort of light, like it's less a role in their life, right? And that's how you can see that just because the collective holds space for all of these like memes, right, these collective symbols, doesn't mean that each one of those is symbolic to every individual, right? You have to look through the eyes of the individual to see what is symbolic, right? And I don't know, I just want to talk about that because I love that. I think that it's weird. Okay, so I wanted to kind of bring up the tarot to help allude to the Mars in Cancer and Jupiter in Aries kind of a alignment, right? Yeah, just for a little bit. And I also wanted to talk about how the square of Jupiter and Mars is actually going to perfect when after Jupiter moves into Taurus, right, and Mars moves into Leo, and that's where the height of the psychic tension will be. And I also want to talk about that a little bit too. So yeah, so if we're talking about like the tarot symbolism to Mars and Cancer, right, we have the Tower card and we have the Chariot, right? And we can actually see one of the more like the Chariot actually shows us a really powerful instance of Cancer, right? So you can actually see like the positive side more easily, right? Like at its height of this development of Mars and Cancer, even though it's at its detriment, right, we're really empowering our soul by aligning our creative force with where we're coming from in our nourishment, right? But like the hard process of this is Mars is like, it's always like a it's always like a channel of power, right? It's unstable, it's insatiable. So like what happens is there's an evolution coming to our like lunar foundation, right? Like our soul. And so this is really like a experiencing like a distaste for what we might have liked in the past, and experiencing a taste for what we may not know that we've enjoyed, right? So there's a sort of opening up of self, right, in our foundation. So it's like that's sort of the difficulty, is like we thought we were coming from one place, right, but now we're like heightened to a whole new level, and we're figuring out what we truly want now, right? It's almost like a full moon after you've had it. Now what's next? You know, it's that kind of energy of unraveling. So yeah, what is the height of this though, right? The height of this is really aligning your intention with what you need, right? And so at its height, there is such a spiritual alignment, right? Because you're forcing yourself to care for yourself, right? You're forcing we're being forced to align with what nurtures us and what supports us, right? So I just find that really interesting, but it is almost like this shedding, right? And there's going to be a sense of not knowing who we are, right? And rediscovering who we are, right? And that's the difference between Mars in Cancer versus Mars in Capricorn, right? The change that Mars can bring in Capricorn is more like a step to the next level, where the change that Mars brings in Cancer is like turning the foundation, so we're literally in a new level, right? We're in a new game, right? And so this is where the sort of difficulty comes in, like a rediscovery of the self. And so at its worst, right, you're not going to understand why what fueled us in the past is no longer hyping us up and driving us, right? And this is sort of the negative element, where you can sort of see a child just having a tantrum and not necessarily knowing how to express its needs, right? Like I said, that's sort of the worst, like the lowest, or just the worst energy that could come of this, right? Whereas the highest energy would literally be an uncovering of one's new and true desires and needs, right? And then aligning with those, right? Such that when you're moving in a direction, there's no passivity, right? It's all it's all in alignment with who you are, right? So that's very beautiful. Yeah. And so now, okay. So Mars is this very masculine and fiery planet, right? And so this is why there's already spiritual tension in the sort of reception and mothering sign of Cancer, right? And I always really like these tense psychic alignments, even though that's what they are. Like, they are mental disorder. Like, it's mental disorder kind of energy, right? But what do we get out of this, right? We get a further clarity and alignment with our psyche, so our emotions can pour out more fluidly through what we're involved in, right? So we're vital when we're doing what we're doing, right? And that's sort of the gift that comes through these struggles, right? Or the gift that we make after we endure this turmoil, right? So one of the things I brought up previously, like on my TikTok, was that Jupiter in Aries is really, like, although Jupiter is such a feminine planet, it doesn't really do bad in Aries, right? And this is because Aries, although Jupiter is kind of bringing this presence of like what you could be, right? Like, Aries is the one, so Jupiter is showing us what that looks like, right? What is the one? Like, what is the best? What is the greatest, right? And although there's friction with Aries, because Aries is like, bitch, I'm the great, like, what? That's me. But Aries doesn't really take things personal like that. It looks at this imposing sort of wisdom, right, that's coming through, just literally sitting like the boss, and it looks like, whoa, I could be that one day, right? And this is hyping up Aries and driving Aries, right? So we have this real sort of competitive spirit right now with Jupiter and Aries, right? And this is where the psychic tension starts to arise, even though, like I said, the square is going to perfect when we move into Leo, Mars in Leo, and then Jupiter in Taurus, right? The square is already starting with the Jupiter and Aries teaching us, like, you know, you want to be the biggest, like, you thought you knew what you wanted, right? And this is like it, and you see it, but now Mars is in Cancer, like, but is that really what you wanted, right? And that's sort of where the tension comes, because we're going through, like I said, this spiritual development of intent, really aligning ourselves with where we're coming from, a sort of shedding of the old, right? And so we're going through this process of recalibrating, but with what we thought we wanted or what we're going to want in the future, we already see like this grandiose show of what it could be, right? And that's sort of that tension, because it's like there's pressure already to be the best, right? And to exert your individuality when we're still figuring out, we're in a process of rediscovering that, right? And that's where that tension sort of comes from. But like I said, we're going to see this square or this tension really perfect in Leo versus Taurus, right, as this transit goes on. So what Jupiter and Taurus is going to bring us to is more so this steady, steadfast, you know, just do the due diligence, like, it's the teacher of time, right? Like, literally, like, if you just do this 1,000 times, right, every day, you know, it'll be there. But it's not worried about right now. It's not worried about results, right? And so that's where the tension is between Mars and Leo, is we're going to want to put on this show, right? We're going to want to already have, now that we've went through this break of Cancer, right, and we've realigned our will with our soul, right, we're ready to show it, right? But Jupiter, and where the actual product or the actual resource or the vitality, the love, you know, the benefit is going to be in Taurus, right? So there's going to be a lot of drive towards really making something apparent and boisterous and loud and lovely, because we know what we want now, right? And we can do that. But there's going to be this sort of, well, did you take the time to do it, right? Well, is this something that you've been doing for years, or is this just something that now you want to do, right? And the Jupiter in Taurus is going to kind of show you, like, hey, this doesn't really have the sustain power that it needs, and there's going to be a lot of sort of attention and reception sort of pulled away from that, right? It's going to be pulled more to the ground, right? It's going to say, no, you need to put in the work before you actually put on this show, right? Maybe you do know what you want, and that's great, but we need to see you actually, like, grind, right? It's not going to be right now. It's going to take time, right? And so that's sort of how this tension is going to arise and how it's going to ground, right? Really interestingly enough. So Jupiter right now moving into Aries is showing us everything we can be, and as it moves into Taurus, we're going to see the greatness of it, right? So we have this real experience of really like a personal connection, right? Like the two most personally connected signs, Aries and Taurus, right? That we've seen, right? And that we're experiencing and that we want, right? But we're driven in this direction of sort of renewal and just popping off right now, and that's sort of where the tension's going to be, right? Because we're trying to make new and we're trying to bring light when Jupiter is just trying to have us ground and stabilize, right? So we're going to feel like, although we really know what we want now and we've really put it into a great showable sense, right, there isn't as much attention on that, and there's more attention on what has just been, right, and what is going and what has the momentum. And there's a real sort of sense of like jealousy, for real, especially with it being in Leo. Like Leo is like, look, I've got it, like I'm doing it, I'm actually putting on a show, right? But then Jupiter and Taurus is just sitting there like in their own like cave on their own farm doing what they've been doing, and all of a sudden, because they've been doing that for so long, they're attracting the crowds, right? And Mars is, in Leo is like, I'm literally like, I just, you know, pushed my will to the T and I made a next level performance, and people are just like, well, we just want to see if that has sustained power, right? This is the first time we've seen you do that, so we don't really know how to take that, right? And this is gonna that's where like the sort of, on the worst element, the jealousy aspect comes from, but on the best element, it's really creating this psychic fortitude, right, in order to allow us to embrace the process, right, rather than the reception we get on the current performance, right, is really just perform like we have that reception. Because if you continually walk down that road, eventually what Jupiter is showing us, that's going to create the stability we need to be a magnet, right, to be a coil, to be this sort of satellite dish that's just receiving, right? But that is coming from just really taking the time, right? It's not going to be doing something new and special. This is all going to be about getting to know what you want, right? And then just doubling down, acting like you've already got it in a sense, and then just enjoying the process and enjoying the journey. So that's what I want to talk about pretty much. So, hey, thank you. I love you. Dublin.